A very warm welcome to our summer guest this morning, Reverend Iona MacLean. She serves St. David's Presbyterian Church, and many of our congregants, parishioners at St. John's, are probably familiar with that sanctuary and with Iona because often during the summer months we go there, we share worship, we move around. This year, of course, is different, but this time we visit virtually. We have a conversation this morning. So, good morning, Iona. How are you?
Good morning, Hubert. I am doing well, ready for vacation, but have survived these past few months, and so is St. David's, so we're grateful.
I know the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So you picked a very interesting passage from the prophetic tradition, Isaiah. We just read it this morning during worship, so people are familiar with it, they've heard it. What in this particular passage speaks to you?
I think it zeroes in on the purpose, the nature, the mission of the people of God. It answers, at least in part, and I think in a very significant way, the question, why are we here? What is the purpose of gathering in worship? Why does it matter? And what effect does it have not only in our own lives, either personally or as a congregation, but in our relationship with the world around us? And I think it is essential, my understanding of discipleship is that it's not just within the four walls, well, even the virtual four walls, but it is something that shapes how we live in all of our relationships in the community around us, in the global community. So to me, it strikes at the heart of who we are and what we're supposed to be doing.
And what I also enjoy about the fact that you picked this particular passage is it seems to, I think it resonates with our times. This was written during a time when the people of Judah came back from the Babylonian exile. They came back to a Jerusalem that was in shambles. It was torn down. The temple was ruins, and they needed to rebuild and reconfigure their society. I think that resonates very much with the times we are in now. We have to ask ourselves, in a way, we have to reconfigure our society as well after the pandemic, and maybe during a time of extended pandemic. What is our priorities? What shall we do? What should we focus on? Do you feel that too?
Yes, I mean, even this passage was written or proclaimed sometime, yes, after the return from exile, and perhaps even after the rebuilding of the temple, but as the community was trying to figure out how then they were to continue their life as the people of God. So even if the building is there, for example, what's it for? And even if the relationship with God is there, what is the purpose of that relationship, and how does it play out in daily life, in our economic and political and social spheres? It's clear that the message is that religion is not just about manipulating God into saying, I approve, you're good people. It has to do with how we treat our neighbor.
Yeah.
And so in the rebuilding that we're faced with, and I guess I can say particularly with St. David's, where we are almost completed some of the renovations that we have been undertaking over the last couple of years and so on, and we are actually going to have new steps down to Grafton Street. They're there now. And so there's an openness to the community around us that hasn't been there physically for a while. That's fine. We're excited, grateful about that. But how does what has been going on shape how we relate to the neighborhood around us? Not just in physical ways, but in relational kinds of ways. So it's not just about us getting back into our sanctuary and saying, oh, phew, thank goodness, here we are in our favorite pew. As long as the distancing tape doesn't prevent me from getting into my favorite pew. But it has to do with how do those open doors now, in a figurative but also literal kind of way, provide some connection with the community around us in ways that are according to the purposes of God for compassion and justice and those kinds of divine concerns.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's a good reminder for any church, and of course, including St. John's. It's good to be reminded of that. In a way, I was thinking maybe Isaiah didn't know how good he had it. Can you imagine having a population that can't wait to get out of bed in the morning and to rush to worship? His worry was not so much that the churches were full, the pews were full. It was, for him, it was about, this is not the point of faith. As you just mentioned, it is the point of faith is not just worship. It is what you do after worship. How do you connect it to your daily lives? How does it transform you? I think you just said it's not about manipulating God. It's not about trying to make God do what you want God to do, to bless you and to make sure you have a comfortable life.
Well, there's kind of he says, he quotes the people as saying, well, why isn't God paying attention to us? Because we're doing all this wonderful ritual, why is God not paying attention? And, the answer to that question is, well, because you're not taking the meaning of that ritual out into the streets. You're oppressing your workers. You're too concerned about the bottom line. You're not living day to day in a way that shows the inclusive love of God. We can. I think the church has often been tempted by the scenario of full pews and the excitement of the particular kind of worship and whatever worship style congregations use and so on, as if that's the be all and end all. And worship is certainly central to who we are. There's no question. I mean, the Presbyterian Church in Canada's Statement of Faith, Living Faith, says we have no higher calling than to worship God day by day and Sunday by Sunday. But then that particular paragraph also says, but worship takes us out into the world. But there's that link between worship and work, the sanctuary and the street.
Yeah. There's a United Church hymn, and maybe it's also in your hymn book. That there's a line that says, "Worship and work must be one."
Right.
And that's, we sometimes forget about that balance. It's orthopraxy and orthodoxy combined. It's doing good works combined with being a person of faith. One cannot be without the other. And maybe that's something we should keep in mind as we try and reinvent what it means to be church in the 21st century, like St. David's is doing and St. John's is doing, and many other churches. How are we living it out? How can people tell we are Christians other than by worship?
I think Isaiah really profoundly describes what being neighborly is, how to love our neighbor. Walter Brueggemann, who has written a commentary on Isaiah, says what the problem is in Isaiah's community is that there is a lack of neighborly economics. In other words, they're not doing business and having their community relationships in a way that reflect the inclusiveness and the concern for the neighbor, particularly the most vulnerable.
This crisis we're going through, at least for churches, means that I think we will see a transition, a transformation in many churches. I remember before I was in a ministry, too often being bored in worship. And I was looking for a church that challenged me, that made me uncomfortable rather than comfy. And I think we'll be seeing more of that now. We'll be beginning to realize that we have a calling and it's right there.
Yeah. I'm hoping very much that, the trauma really of going through this and the uncertainty, we don't know where we're going or how long we're going to be dealing with the specifics of the virus. There can be a tendency in troubled times to withdraw and to think, well, we can't physically do the things that we were able to do before, and to just tend to our own situation, our own wounds, if you like, our own concerns. But I believe that's not what we're being called to do. Because this has had global impact, in many ways, we are more connected with the world around us. We realize that we are one humanity. We are all vulnerable to this particular virus and to the economic calamity that it has produced. So we cannot go back into our little corners and have anything good come out of it. We need to have that community-wide, that global-wide perspective on things, because it's staring us in the face day by day. What happens in one country affects another country, and what I do or don't do affects a lot of people in my community. So I'm hoping that we don't fall prey to that sense of isolationism. I want to just stay in and protect myself or my own little community, but that we use the good things that can come out of this to connect more widely, to understand that our strength is in recognizing our common humanity and that we need all to work for the common good.
Isaiah points out that we have that choice. I think he also implies saying that if you make the wrong choice, you basically do what led to the exile in the first place. Don't make that same mistake again. And I think we're in a similar situation where we have that choice that we can make. Either withdraw and do our thing that makes us feel comfortable, or reach out and create an uncomfortable situation for ourselves. But then Isaiah says that's where God will be present. That's where I will be. That's that's when you will thrive. That's when security will be part of your lives, healing.
That's the thing. By the end of this passage, there is the promise that if we are able to understand our relationship with God as being lived out in how we live with one another and in the world, for justice and for peace and for equity and for all those important essential ingredients, then we will realize the refreshing and restoring grace of God in ways that we can't possibly if we're just huddled on our own. It's, he uses, well, in the English, if you do this, then you will be like a watered garden. You will be a repairer of the breach. You will know life in a way that you can't possibly know it if you're just self-centered and self-absorbed.
But it requires us taking the first step, taking a chance, going out into unknown territory. And that is intimidating.
Yes, it is. But there is the assurance of the presence of God in that going out. The well-watered garden image, especially when it's in the context of, Isaiah's speaking and living in an arid country. So the gift of refreshing water and so on comes out, for example, in the Lord's My Shepherd, the 23rd Psalm, where God leads people besides the sheep, besides still waters, for refreshment and restoring. So it is terrifying, really, to take on this calling, and we're not sure what it looks like in these days. We may have thought 6 months ago that we had some imagination of what it would look like. Now it's something quite different, although it has some of the same ingredients in it, I believe. But the method, the means, the ways of doing these things are going to be different, and it's unnerving, it's unstable, unsettling, that's the word. But the assurance is that as we follow this calling of God, that God is with us in it. You know, God travels with us, leads us, carries us when necessary, but we realize most clearly, I think, the presence of God when we are engaged in the work that the kind of life that God wishes us to arrange and to be involved in.
Thank you for that. That's, I think, I'm looking at the clock here. That's a wonderful time, wonderful moment, I think, in our conversation to wrap it up. As always, we've only been able to skip over the surface of this very profound and very rich passage. Mm. But I hope it brought up some, I think it did. You brought up some wonderful thoughts and insights that will have triggered some positive thought with the people who are listening in on our conversation. Thank you for that.
Good. Well, I'm grateful for being a part of this, and I wish you and your congregation God's blessing as you move forward in these times.
Thank you. And of course, the very same thing from us to you. I know you'll be taking a break after, as of next week.
Yes, starting Monday for 4 weeks. So
good. You need it. You deserve it.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
And may you return refreshed and grounded and with enough energy to continue this challenging process.
Oh, and also with you when you get your chance for a break.
Thank you so much.
Hey.